Okay, so we're just going live now. And here we go. Okay, so we are live on YouTube. For anyone who was trying to join the Zoom and was unable to get into the meeting, I do apologize about that. It was a security issue. We had to change the meeting, the Zoom info, the Zoom link. So we are on a new Zoom link, but we are still broadcasting live to YouTube, and the recording will be available after the fact.
To join by Zoom, I guess they weren't able to. Do we have public comments on the agenda? I didn't.
We do not.
Oh, okay. Well, then we're good.
So let me see here.
No. So next agenda item then is to introduce Dave Whitty.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just doing some technical things here. Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for coming. We do have Dave Whitty here presenting to the OCP Steering Committee this morning. Dave.
Welcome everybody, and yeah, pleased to be here. So Danielle, if you can throw up the PowerPoint.
Let me
I
just
apologize, everybody. I thought I was going to try and do it from here, but I'm not technically capable of doing that. So here we are. So Danielle, these are fly-ins, so this is going to be somewhat painful for you. So I apologize.
That's okay. I'll give it my best shot.
Okay. So there's the title. We can move on from that. You know who I am, most of you, some of you. All right. So I've been asked to talk about the 0910 OCP, and really the titles in these slides are basically titles that I was asked to speak to. So just bear with me as I go through, and certainly if you've got questions for clarification, just jump in and we can deal with it that way. And I'll also obviously have a conversation at the end. So when I look back on that 0910 OCP, for me, the key words were we really tried to be, and I think we were inclusive of the varied interests in the community, and you'll see that through the processes that we used. Certainly proactive in exploring new emerging issues and thoughts of the day. And so we did that, and you'll see later on the kinds of things we did to address that. And certainly following that, exploratory and thinking about what are some of the things that needed to be thought about and addressed. I mean, certainly, you know, the ongoing issue of Snug Cove and ferry traffic and that sort of thing. And were there other ways to deal with that, and how might we? Respectful was an important part of that process, and something that any process I'm in is a key element, so that we can have full discourse, but do it in a respectful way, and then collaborative and working across the board with other agencies and that sort of thing. Okay, thanks. And I tend to be known as a focus guy, so timelines and products were always front and center. But having said that, always we were flexible about new information or needs and making adjustments as we went. So three fundamental elements, and I'm going to refer to these in some detail now. So the first one is events and activities, and just hold that one now. So you've had a chance, I think, if you go into the OCP to see this, but it bears repeating. So what did we do in terms of events and activities? So we started with an intro meeting, a community launch to really, with the community, talk about what it is we hope to do and how we hope to do it. And talked about the legislative requirements from OCPs, because there are some strict requirements that one must follow through the charter. And then we did a community survey in August, and purposefully we kickstarted this in before the summer was done, because we wanted off-islanders involved, and sometimes, as you know, there's quite a significant exit after Labor Day. And so we wanted to make sure they were involved. So we kickstarted this in June, and then through that community survey, we had 320 respondents to that. So that was an important part to just get us started. And then we had a community visioning workshop, and we did that in August as well. We had 80 plus attendees, and we did that purposely in August so that we could capture summer residents as well. And then we had an ideas forum in October, 90 attendees. Now I'm going to talk about this in a little more detail later. We had family questionnaire. We did seniors and teen focus groups. We had 2 open houses through the process early on in March, and then in June, where we were wrapping up. We actually had, the other thing we did is we had the OCP Steering Committee. We actually had workshops rather than just kind of meetings. We actually had workshops where we went through and really had some stand-up discussions and to build agreement. And those were both open to the public as well, as were the steering committee meetings. And then we had and sought group submissions, and we had individual submissions. So there's quite a robust, and I'll talk more about specific numbers discussion. Okay. Research and mapping. So one of the things we did, it doesn't always happen in these processes. We did it because I was there. So 13 background papers where we explored topics that we thought were important in detail. And then 7 option backgrounders where we were exploring the different kind of options that we might want to deal with. And then we actually had those as workshop topics for the steering committee. And then we did some significant environmental mapping as well, because that had not existed for Bowen. And then the next third fundamental element is communications, of course. And so we had a dedicated website throughout the process. We used social media throughout the process. And email broadcasts throughout the process. We had 4 newsletters mailed to residents and property owners. So as you can hear and see, quite a robust, okay, Daniel, thank you. Quite a robust process. So one of the questions I asked was it a different process from some of the other ones that I've been involved in? So recognizing that in 2001, I left urban systems to be Dean of Architecture at the University of Manitoba. So that's when my OCP work started, except when I got back invited on Bowen to do that one. But anyway, so Chilliwack was a huge OCP. It was a new OCP, 96, 97. And then another one following that was actually Ladysmith. It was a minor OCP update. So one that was just huge, and not one which was an update. And then Tofino asked, and this is when I wrapped up in 2001. So it was actually the last project, Planet Urban Systems, that I worked on, was major new OCP, quite a successful one in Tofino. And as a result, when I was provost at VIU, when they did their update in 2010, they asked me to come back and mentor them on that process. And that was a minor OCP update. Okay.
Oh, and sorry, Dave, I just see a question or a hand up from one of our members.
Sure.
My first question was, are you taking questions in the middle or the beginning or the end?
Oh, yeah, no, I thought I mentioned that. Sorry, yeah, please do that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is a few slides back, but just very quick question around I think you said background papers, etc., and you said there was a number of them.
Yeah.
Who actually prepared those?
Me.
Was that okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So
the committee said, this is an idea we'd like to explore. So,
okay.
I had time in my hands, so I could do it.
And you did, like, you personally, or you had staff do all of, like,
No.
you said there was a lot, or yeah.
No. Okay, so we'll get, okay. Hang on to that question. So I'm going to address it about the staff thing. But no, I wrote them myself. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the process is, because I was the lead on them, and in the case of Chilliwack and Tofino and Ladysmith, and the first ones, I was the lead consultant. in the Tofino minor OCP update, they asked me to come in and mentor them and paid me to spend a weekend working with them on it. That was that paid my way. It didn't pay me, but anyway, got to stay in Tofino. So similar processes. So overall approach is basically the same, because this was kind of how we did OCPs if I got hired to do them. So an inclusive, again, proactive, exploratory, respectful, collaborative, with twists in the application. So and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So maybe next one, please. Danielle, this just seems to be working. I think it's going to be okay. And you can just run through these. So Tofino had a smart growth theme. Ladysmith was a community heritage theme, because it was basically an update. And then Chilliwack was managing growth theme, because they're in the ALR and huge, they can't expand. They've got a urban containment boundary, big one, or not a big one, but a significant one, which really had them focus on how do we grow in a compact way. Okay. So all of them, though, for me, was taking time to get it right. So that's really an important thing. And sometimes you have to take a deep breath and maybe you have to pause and reflect. So taking time to get it right is important. Okay. So, but there were, and then you asked me, were there similar ways that you did these? Well, community surveys, yeah, absolutely fundamental. Visioning workshop, identifying key issues and wants. I want to talk about this just for a sec. And purposely key issues and wants, because needs and wants aren't the same thing, right? So wants often are some pretty broad ideas that just may not be possible because of legislation, may not be possible because of cost, whatever. But my view is it's important to explore wants rather than just a needs-driven process. So you have to explore needs as well, but envisioning workshop for me it's about bigger stuff than needs. It's about what do we really want to achieve here, okay? And then the ideas form something I've used consistently. Bring in a guest speaker, usually it was either a day and a half, often at night, so you'd have an evening presentation by someone, might even have a dinner with the committee, so that the committee could actually get to know each other, get members better, particularly in big cities like Chilliwack, for instance, a little different. And then a one-day workshop, very structured, and people, breaking into groups and exploring ideas, and perhaps the guest speakers usually I hope would stay on and be someone as a resource person. Might have multiple speakers. Anyway, an ideas forum where you're exploring big ideas. Okay. And then interactive open house is absolutely critical. That's pretty basic. I mean, that happens in all OCPs. And newsletters, obviously, pretty basic. Use of community events to connect and seek. I'm going to talk about the ones in Bowen in a minute, but that's something that doesn't always happen, and I think it's an important thing, making use of community events to connect with the public and seek input. Okay. And hopefully for all an enjoyable process. And I think the communities that I identified, people came up to me after or sent me notes and things and said that they were very happy with the process. But that's just basic fundamental tools that were similar across the board. Okay, so what was different? Well, first of all, and this speaks to the question that I was asked, I started as the chair of the OCP Steering Committee. I'd lived on Bowen for 18 years at that point, ended up moving after 23 years after Marg died. But anyway, and I was on sabbatical from my role of Dean of Architecture. So to answer the question, like, I had time in my hands, and so I was going to chair the OCP Steering Committee, and then the municipal planner resigned, like right at the start of the process. So council said, okay, now what are we going to do? So they said, wait, you're a planner. Can you step down as chair and plan it? So Jim, there's your question answered. So that's all I did. I wasn't in Daniel's position where he's juggling 14,000 things at once. And I was just asked to do that. So, I walked down from my place in Miller's Landing and go to the office and had an office and spent my day working on the OCP. I loved it. Okay, next please. So I got to write those papers because what else was I going to do? So my knowledge of the community and its players, organizations and issues was a bonus, right? I mean, that was really helpful. So that was different. So just to say, in the other ones, I was a consultant. I was a paid consultant. So I'd come in, I never go in, and I like to stay, so I'd stay a few days. I'd not in and out, kind of just don't think that's the way to go. But anyway, I'd spend time there, so I got to know these places, but in Tofino in particular. Okay, thanks. But nevertheless, I wasn't a resident, whereas in Bowen. So the level of engagement, what was different, was high and often passionate, but respectful, similar to Tofino. So it was high and often passionate on Bowen, because that's Bowen, and very similar to Tofino. But the advantage was it was less fractured in terms of fragmentation of interests. Because in Tofino, you got the tourism interest, resource harvesting and growth, and all coming together. And there are people on the streets in Tofino that would see somebody coming down the street and they cross over so they wouldn't have to look at them. And I actually had those fractured individuals representing those fractured groups, individuals sitting on our steering committee. And in the end, I'm so pleased to say, in the end, they were talking to each other and respected each other. And there's a whole other, I can talk an hour about how we did that. But anyway, but that was different. That was very different than Bowen, because I had a leg up on Bowen. So different forms of hands-on activity, though. In Tofino, we actually, and I'm a great proponent of charrettes. We use charrettes in Tofino. We could have used the charrette in hindsight in Bowen on Snug Cove, but we didn't have really the time and the resources to do that. And community mapping, which is special places for various ages. So I really believe in community mapping, and Tofino was a natural for that. So for instance, in Tofino, the kids mapped where they mountain biked and that kind of thing. And so we were able to build that into the process. Okay, thanks. And social media was way more advanced in 2009, way more advanced. So we got to use that much more. And our, go ahead, yeah. And the last one is that I think I was, Allison can speak to that, but anyway, I think it was trusted from the start, whereas it took time for trust to build in the other communities. So that was different too. So maybe we were able to do things a little differently. Okay, so that was asked the question, what worked? I think it's fair to say the public engagement pieces did work. And if you look at page 12 and 13 of the OCP, you'll see 350 attended meetings, 700 plus participated in the process. So it was different people. So that's really a lot of people. Yeah. In particular, this is something I said I'd talk about. The hands-on community involvement worked well. So we were at Bowfest, we were at the Christmas Craft Fair, we had a booth. There's actually a picture of these events in the OCP, and just that hands-on direct activity with the community. And we made those fun too, they got to participate. Engagement of a cross-section of the population, so we included very specifically, we went after the seniors, the school kids, had meetings in the school, had meetings at Bowen Court, interest groups, and on and off islanders. We really focused on that. And then the steering committee was very active. There were over 20 meetings. Steering committee didn't kind of meet monthly, just monthly or whatever. It met workshops and other, when we had strategic decisions to make or involvement. The other thing is that the steering committee was the face of the OCP at all of the events. So, I mean, I was there, but it was really Sue Ellen and others who were always front and center in those meetings. Okay. And then the background papers that we talked about were very helpful in analyzing issues and trends. And they provided grounded information for the committee and the community. I don't know where those are now, but they were.
I've got them.
Really?
It's Allison Day.
Yeah.
How did you decide on the topics for the background papers?
I got it, the steering committee, and we just talked about them. I can't remember. Yeah, they were issues. So what would happen is we had a community meeting and people would raise something, and then it appeared, we don't have the answer for it. Then I would say, I think we need why don't we do a background paper on it? And then we would do that, or I would do it. But the steering committee was quite active in those kind of decisions too. I might have done a couple of those just because I thought we needed doing them, but yeah. Do you have it? So that's interesting you have those. But and then the other thing is, of course, we had a consultant because I was the municipal planner, right? I couldn't write this on my own and do the work on my own. So Linda Allen of City Spaces, who is no longer with us, unfortunately, did a terrific job, and so they were doing this. They put the document together. A lot of it I wrote, a lot of it they wrote, and then we presented it together. So what didn't work? I'll let you read that one. But I think it's fair to say that in most communities, there are always the skeptics, right? And in the case of Bowen, I knew who they were because I lived on Bowen, right? And so that was a little different. That was a little different. Whereas if you're a consultant coming in, you know, you get people at a meeting race and you can tell just by the, you know, their arms are folded and they get kind of aggressive. You think, I don't think they're really into this process. Whereas in Bowen, kind of knew who some of the skeptics were, and that just goes with the territory. Okay. And then the last.
Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry, a question on that.
Sure, Jim.
Could you elaborate a bit more? So you say it didn't work, that you didn't get through to the skeptics didn't work? It didn't, like the plan didn't address that? Like I'm not sure what you.
Okay. So at the end of the day, there was a council that came in after this that a couple of them were skeptical of the OCP. They were. I know that because I knew who they were because they talked to me. I won't name them, but that's the case. And so, you know, you that's just, that happens. And
The OCP as a whole? Or
yeah, generally they just, for some reason, there were a couple of people that just weren't happy with what we did for whatever reason. But I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk about that in just a sec. If you just stay with me on that, and I'll come back to it. Okay, the next week. Okay, the other, for me, what didn't work was the land bank idea, and I pushed hard on that, and it was decided by council not to follow through on that. And it's doable. It's being done elsewhere, and the idea was that the density transfer from areas that we thought were particularly sensitive, they've been current zone for whatever density, and transferring that density into areas where density could handle it, into Snug Cove, or maybe into you know, other areas. So for me, and I put a game changer. It would be interesting if we actually included that to see where Bowen went. But that's, in some ways, that's a personal. It's just something that I was disappointed we didn't do, and that had to do with, there was some advice that was given that said, no, you shouldn't do that. And actually I had advice by a really preeminent person who said, yeah, you should do it, but that's okay. Just, you asked me what didn't work, and I'm being just telling you what I saw and what I see. Okay. But I believe it was seen by most to be a very successful process. So Jim, to answer your question, I think, but nevertheless, that's the reality, the skeptics thing. That's just the way it is. And you're never going to get 100%. That's unfortunately the way it is. So the next one, I think, discusses that a little more. Yeah. So in February 2015, I'm still on Bowen at that point. I moved away after Marg died in July. But so Mayor and Council called me and said, Dave, can you come and talk about the OCP? So I forgot I did that. So I went online, and I was searching Bowen and the OCP, because that's a long time ago for me, and found this presentation I did. It's online. It's kind of cool. And it's a PowerPoint presentation that I delivered to Murray Skeels was the mayor at the time, and whomever else was on council. Allison, you would have been on their council then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they said, can you come in? Because there was this was a new council after the other council, and there was just some question about the OCP or just, getting up to speed on it. So this is one of my slides. The OCP cannot be and should not be all things to all people, right? It must display the inherent requirement for a democratically based piece of work. It must be grounded in community input, but framed by the reality of the need to make informed and accountable decisions. And that's kind of at the heart of OCPs and why sometimes not everybody can agree. And you can't expect everybody to agree. But it was interesting that the new mayor and council of that day said, Woody, can you come and talk about that OCP? They knew about it, but they just wanted another kind of, and you can go in and see that presentation because it actually, it's got one strong personal view from mine in it about the need to stay true to what you do. Okay. So what would I do differently or what would I advise you? I was asked those two questions. So first of all, actually not much. I think that was a really good OCP process and I think a really solid product. And let me stop there for a minute. The other thing you may or may not know, I was a business owner on Bowen. My son and I owned the pub and the beer and wine store. So like I was invested on the business side. So, they think, oh yeah, another planner, an academic guy. But, I've been in business all my life. I've had investments here, there, and whatever. But we actually owned the pub and the beer and wine store. So we're invested in Bowen from an economic business side, right? At the time of doing the OCP, just so you know that I had that diversity of background. Okay. So one of the things that I would do differently is make more use of social media and design charrettes and community mapping. I think the latter is kind of a fun thing to do where people, they identify their special places and do it in a mapping form. And I thought we did it on Bowen, but I'm not sure. And design charrettes where I'm a great believer in design charrettes and Fritz knows all about those. So next. So my advice, stay true to transparent, engaged, fulsome community input. And it takes a lot of work, but it's the only way to go in my view. Best thing that ever happened to planning. Next. Continue to recognize that Bowen is special. This is important, but sometimes special is different for different people.
Yeah.
Right? That's true, particularly in island communities, I find. Next, please. And be prepared for wide-ranging debate, but insist to be respectful. That's absolutely fundamentally key. And one, and there's, I know you don't, it's okay. I've done that in big cities like Winnipeg, and actually, I remember doing it on Gabriola once, where I got people in the room who were just absolutely totally divided on the subject to actually vote on how we were going to conduct a meeting. So when we conducted the meeting and someone was out of line, I'd say, "Oh, no, but you all agreed that we would do it this way, right?" And they go, "Yes," and then we could carry on. so that worked. But anyway, I think just this idea of making sure it's respectful and people understand that at the beginning of meetings. Okay. And be prepared for hard decisions and recommendations. That's where you're going to have some great debates in your committee, and those are really interesting and can be actually hopefully enjoyable at the end of the day. I think that's it. Yep. Thanks for listening. Good job, Danielle. I was concerned that was going to be very challenging, but it worked well. You anticipated well. All right.
You're on mute, Daniel.
I'll stop sharing now, but open it for any questions the committee has.
I have a question on surveys, either online surveys or surveys that were done at events, and gathering information through surveys. How did you, in terms of rating the usefulness or the helpfulness of that? If you could just share a little bit more on surveys.
Yeah, they're fundamentally important as much for the people at the other end of them, because it's a tactile. They get to put their ideas down in writing, and it's important to, because you choose the questions to answer the particular issues or questions you believe need to be answered. So I think they're fundamental. And in fact, it was the first thing I showed in terms of kind of the common tools, right?
Can I just add to that? I think there's a lot of people that will not, even though they're very used to speaking in public, stand up at a public meeting and give any ideas. And the survey is sort of protective because it is anonymous and they can express their opinions. And there's always room for, on any surveys, there's usually the other bit. It's the timeline I was wondering about. As I recall, the committee started in 2009 or 2008. I'm trying to find the actual bylaw.
I think here's how we started. So you're already formed. What we did is, and so I don't know when I was appointed chair, but anyway, must have been 09, must have been, I can't remember. But what we did is we had a committee of 3 highly respected people who vetted. So the committee nominated. There was a nomination process for the committee, and so you had to have your name put forward and by 2 people, and then and the reason why you wanted to sit on the committee, and it went to this. And there were 2. No, I think it was 2 people plus myself. I made the 3rd, who were kind of apolitical and were seen by, I think, fair to say, Alison, really highly regarded, unbiased, and they then recommended the committee to council through that process. So people couldn't point fingers and say, well, yeah, you got appointed because of blah, blah, blah. It was that seemed to work. But I mean, you're beyond it. But pointing to the time. So it did start early because we had that process too. And that started early on in 09, like early on, I remember, like in spring, March or something.
So I think it dragged out over an election period before it got final reading, if I'm remembering correctly. That's why I was looking for the bylaw.
Okay.
I think. Daniel, do you know the answer to that one?
Yeah, and it was like potential bylaw. My memory is adopted in 2011.
Yeah.
But the bylaw is dated 2010.
Okay, so there was an election in 2011, but would have been in the fall of 2011. So I guess we did get it. It took basically the whole 3-year term.
Right. And Alison, if I recall, there was a push to make sure it got
that's what I was trying
prior to the council stepping down. Yeah.
Because I know we did a lot of stuff after we got the draft from the committee, but Hap Stelling got involved, and I remember some changes and things happening. Yeah.
But I was actively involved through all of that.
Okay.
And that's where I was arguing for the density transfer during that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
All right, I'm going to tighten this up a little bit because we started to get hands up in the air. So the best thing, if there's lots of conversation that's going to happen, let's use the Zoom function to raise hands. Also, hello everyone. Sorry, I went from one meeting to the next, and I got caught in the great Zoom link change of 2024. So I am here. Thank you for being here too, Dave. And I'm going to move over to Glenn, please.
Thanks, folks. Daniel, did I hear you say that you do have all the little background studies that Dave referred to that he completed?
Yes. I don't know if I have them all like digitally versus paper, but we can make sure they're all available.
Yeah.
There's 13 of them, I think.
Yeah, Dave, are you able to give us kind of a bit of a flavor of like what kind of topics were explored? Or maybe remember that?
I think density transfer was one of them for sure.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, Dave, being an engineer, I'm kind of more into the facts and technical side of things. And, I think the real critical thing for me moving forward through this process is conversation and consideration for service delivery. Yeah. And curious to know whether there's any background on that. And the second question, if you can bear with me, is I don't know, Dave, if you've felt like you've kept pace or current with Bowen Island living, whether you have any comments or advice in terms of how you feel that time and Bowen Island has maybe evolved, and what kind of new considerations would you give advice for us at this point from what you did in the past?
Well, I think the ongoing question of responding to growth is always going to be an issue for Bowen, because you sit next door to the behemoth, and that's always going to continue to be a fundamental issue. So yeah, I think yeah, I mean it's different. I mean, I go back. No one knows when I'm back, but I go back and literally every couple of years the paint marks stay at the bench, basically, keep a low profile. But no, I follow a little bit. I used to read the undercurrent, but I don't anymore. But I used to follow pretty closely.
That's fine. That's fine.
I mean, I guess, I mean, I'll be honest. I think that it's easy for me to sit here and talk about potential missed opportunities, but there are a whole bunch of things that came to play in those. Cowan Point, for those of you that have been around a long time, know that I was very active in that and did a design charrette for it that really everybody, well, I think, fair to say, council at the time thought, this is the answer. We can, do development there in a different way, and that didn't happen. So, yeah. But so I just be, I just think there's going to be some fundamental key decisions that are going to be made. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. First, I think thank you very much, Mr. Whitty, for speaking to us today. It's really helpful for the group to hear about your experience in the process from the inside. I had a question about affordable housing in the OCP. And there were, or in the 2010 one, there are quite a few policies specific to that. I'm wondering if you had any thoughts and recommendations about this next OCP and how to maybe make better use of the OCP as like a tool to drive some of that. Just thinking about the development that we've seen in the snug since 2010 and still a lot of development elsewhere on the island. Just any thoughts on how the OCP can help to direct some of that density of the cove? You mentioned the land bank earlier. Wondering if that's still something that you give thought to. And then also, and maybe this is more of a question for Daniel and staff just about the Snug Cove plan. And if that is something that needs to happen in parallel with this or needs to be updated, I'm not sure. So it's kind of a two-pronged question there. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm mindful that I'm hesitant to be specific because I'm not there anymore, right? And so I don't want to make judgment on the future. I think I would urge a review of the density transfer one more time. The islands trust allow it, and other communities are doing it, and I would look at that as a way perhaps to certainly address that potential for affordable housing. We did quite a bit of somebody reminded me recently, called me the other day from the island, said, "Oh, you're going to be on this," and who we worked together on what we called attainable housing back in 2000. probably late 90s, I don't know. And because there was a group that was quite active in that. So it's been an ongoing conversation on Bowen for sure. I think it's one that needs to be wrestled to the ground. Okay, I mean, if you're going to have, as a committee, you're going to have areas you're going to identify as key focuses. You don't need to hear me identify them, but I won't do that. But I draw your attention to that. Let me put it that way. I do think that there are some issues like that that need to be wrestled down to the ground. And so that's why I talk about this notion of being proactive and exploratory, that quite often OCPs end up all looking the same. And in fact, at one time, I remember I went into a community and their OCP, they had the name of another municipality in it, for gosh sakes, because they hadn't done their due diligence. It was just a copy, basically. It was just unbelievable. I said, look at this. I went, oh yeah. But so it needs to be unique to Bowen. I really urge that. And only you know that, not me, because I'm not there anymore. But you need to know what's unique to your Bowen community in 2024. I'm not trying to waffle, but I think, just as a professional, I can't get myself in the box on that.
All right, and we'll take one last question, comment from David, and then we'll move on to Daniel's presentation on the current community plan.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Dave. I'm glad you're here. You and Marg have left quite a hole in our community, and it's really good to see you. I'm also glad to hear your story of how that all came together. At the time, I assumed you were the most amazing volunteer ever in the world. And I was super impressed. I'm still super impressed. My question is largely for the municipality, but starts off with you. And I'm wondering if there's any record of the time commitment for your role in that review. And then the companion to that is if we have room or budget for similar professional help in this review.
Well, basically, I was a full-time employee because the funds were there for I didn't get paid that way, but I did get an honorarium. It was a reduced rate, whatever it was. But anyway, I did receive, so I wasn't a volunteer, but I wasn't paid like staff. But there was money to give me that. But I was on sabbatical, right, too. So I didn't want to double dip. And so that was my sabbatical. And then I got this kind of honorarium thing on a monthly basis. And so it was kind of a unique situation, and it's unusual to have somebody in-house designated as full-time onto an OCP. That's why I hire a consultant.
Yep. Thank you. Councillor Getty, after the buzzer, I would like to move on just for the sake of time, but if you've got a quick question, please jump in.
I just want to say thanks and hi. I wasn't able to participate the last time because of my other work, but I agree with David that you were one of the best volunteers that we ever had. Thanks. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. So am I out of there? Am I gone now? Or
I mean, you can stay and hang out if you like. It's been great having you here, and wonderful to hear the historical context of the OCP and the work that you did and how that interfaced with the municipal government. It definitely added, hearing the personal story of how it came to be, I think is helpful for this committee as we start to embark on this, and we all start to wonder what our roles are going to be and how we're going to be asked to personally step into them and interact with the community and interact with the municipality and the types of leadership that we're going to need to take. So thank you very much for being here.
Okay, Mayor. So I think I'll probably step away and leave it to Danielle. You're in good hands, and wish you every success.
Okay.
Good seeing familiar faces and voices. Take care.
Thanks.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
And Liam, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I was just going to respond to David McCallum's question about budget. We don't have a very firm accounting of the time that was previously spent on the past OCP, but we do have a sufficient budget to hire consultants to help us with this one. So that's in place and approved with this last budget go round.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. And over to back to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much. So at our last meeting, we talked about wanting to look at the 2010 or 2011 OCP in a little bit more detail. So I have a presentation that'll actually go through our 3 OCPs on Bowen. So starting in the 1981 OCP. My slideshow is significantly longer than I would ever bring to council. So I'm not going to read every part of it, especially going through the 2011 OCP, but it is available, or it will be available to look out after. And I'm happy to come back to or focus more on any part if you want, but I also, yeah, don't want to take up your whole time and trying to stay on schedule here. Where are we going? All right. So Bowen's first official community plan was adopted in 1981. So just trying to set some context for Bowen. Bowen in 1981 had just over 1,000 people living in it. So there are some photos that we've borrowed from the museum archives. So showing Bowfest and the old general store as it was in Bowen in the early 80s. The 1981 OCP was 44 pages long and had 73 policies in it and consisted of 5 parts of the OCP. First one being introduction, and then it had a part on land use policies, implementation, and then part 4 being Snug Cove development policies. So heavy focus of the plan, and then part 5 being appendices. And then I'll just go through a couple of their sort of the policies in the plan because you'll see them repeated going forward. So policy 8, general goals of the OCP, outlined 6 general goals of the OCP, and preserving a marine-oriented rural community and atmosphere, establish community service and land use pattern, embody principles of the Islands Trust Act, encourage maintenance of a population with varying income levels, lifestyles, and age groups, provide for the basic needs of full-time residents, seasonal residents, and visitors, and to encourage a variety of building designs which reflect and enhance the nature of the island. And then the OCP had general land use goals in it, and those were to ensure staged gradual development of the island, to prevent those developments which would have a traumatic effect on the rural lifestyle and environment of the island, ensure land uses are suitably located, compatibly related, aesthetically attractive, and in harmony with the natural environment, and then to provide public access to shore, crownland, and other open space consonant with the protection of the community and natural environment. And then it contained residential land use objectives. So these were to limit multiple dwellings by means of density restrictions without prohibiting cluster housing, to prohibit apartment buildings and high-rise types of construction, to encourage low population density, and to give special consideration to senior citizens housing and to encourage this type of development for island residents. So fast forwarding, 1996 was Bowen's second OCP was adopted. So by this time, population on Bowen had more than doubled. It was about 2,700 people. Just some images of that time. So Artisan Square was under construction at that point. We were still in the Islands Trust and still not a municipality. The 1996 OCP had grown to 81 pages and 7 sections, where it talks about implementation, community objectives, land use, services, resources, development permits, and then temporary commercial industrial use permits. This plan started off with principles that I'm not going to read, but it had principles of the plan. And then it's followed up by the plan has broad objectives. And the ones that I've put in italics are ones that essentially taken from the 1981 OCP. So it carried forward many of those objectives of the plan, and it added more objectives. So preserve and protect Bowen Island and its unique amenities and environment for the benefit of Bowen Islanders and residents of the province, to provide environmental stewardship strategies for Bowen Island to be followed by residents and visitors alike, Ensure that Bowen Island is a healthy community with residents working together to improve the quality of life. And then the objectives continue. I'm talking about growth management shall be conditioned by the natural environment, trying to ensure a balance between community well-being and the rights of individual property owners, foster the creation and maintenance of local employment on the island, promote Snug Cove Village form that caters to the pedestrian, to recognize Snug Cove Village as the commercial and community heart of Bowen Island, and seek the cooperation and coordination with other agencies. 1996 OCP goes into general land use objectives. And so again, I've italicized those objectives that are carried over from the 1981 OCP. So the first 4 in this case are those exact same 4 that we saw in 81. And then adds 4 more land use objectives. So to create areas where land is set aside as green space, to discourage further commercial and residential strip or ribbon development, provide for the protection of rights of landowners within the context of community objectives, and to ensure that only compatible land uses are located in any given area so as to avoid conflict between these uses. And then the plan has residential objectives. And so these are about identifying approximate location, amount, type, and density of residential development to meet 5 years of housing needs, to encourage residential cluster development rather than large lot subdivision, maintain the rural character, to permit established residential neighborhoods to continue historic siting variances, and looking for a continuous green viewscape of predominantly indigenous flora to be preserved or created along transportation corridors. Then we fast forward 2011. So at this point, Bowen Island had a population of about 3,400 people. So significant growth from that 1981. We're more than 2,000 more people living on Bowen at that point. Bowen at this point, it was an incorporated municipality, but still under the island's trust. And so this 2011 OCP, so has grown again in size, so 160 pages. The plan has both what they call objectives and policies. So there are 195 objectives in the 2011 OCP and 431 policies. And the 2011 OCP has 11 sections within it. And I'm going to go through these in more detail, but try not to spend too long on it. But so 11 sections: framework and foundations, natural environment, land use management, transportation and mobility, services and systems, public recreation, housing, community facilities and well-being, island heritage, arts and culture, island economy, and then section 11 being implementation. So you'll see sort of from 81 through 96 to 2011 how OCPs, this is true for Bowen and it's probably true for every BC community. OCPs have grown in size and in scale of what they're not only how detailed they can be on things, but how much they're trying to cover and how much they're trying to reflect. This is what we've heard. This is what matters to people. This is what is getting included in the OCP. So even just looking often at tables of contents of communities' OCPs, you can see, okay, these must have been things that matter, that came up during the, during that OCP development. Hence why it gets its own section and its own particular focus. So section 1 of the OCP, frameworks and foundations. Here's a picture in the OCP of the steering committee at one of the events. Section 1 talks a lot about the process of doing the OCP. So like we heard from Dave Whitty today, some of the focus on the events and the community outreach. And then it has what lists as 12 fundamental goals. And again, I've italicized goals that were carried forward as from the 1996 OCP. So you can see largely, again, the same goals are recognized in terms of what Bowen wants to do. Number 4 there has been added, so to minimize Bowen Island's contribution to global climate change. And then second half, again, largely the same goals being reflected back that we saw in 96. And I know the 2011 OCP talks about one of their first steps was revisiting these goals and sort of checking in with the community. Are these still the goals that we have as a community? And largely it seems like that was the case. Number 10 there as well is new, about foster the creation and maintenance of local employment and island-based sustainable activities. Section 2 of the OCP is about the natural environment. And has quite a number of subsections within that looking at the natural environment. So introduction and I'm listing objectives here. I'm not going to read them all, but I'll read maybe just this first one. It's about to maintain Bowen Island's unique environmental heritage, community identity, and sense of place by ensuring that the island's natural landscapes and ecosystems are protected. And then it has sections on environmentally sensitive areas and steep slope areas and environmental impact. And you can see there, objective 8, to encourage environmentally benign development. So we're talking to what the goals of this OCP are. Sections on climate change mitigation. So looking for Bowen to meet or exceed provincial targets for reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to be corporately carbon neutral by 2012. Policies on air quality, and then terrestrial features and habitat, about maintaining large, unfragmented tracts of natural habitat, and preserve and protect terrestrial areas of fragile coastal ecosystems. Sections on freshwater resource and marine resources, and then crown land. So about protecting coastline habitat areas for marine life, to preserve, protect, and enhance the surface and groundwater resources of Bowen Island as finite and self-contained ecosystems. And then finally, sections on Cape Project Curtis lands and shorelines. So the OCP recognizes the unique place, I guess, of Cape Project Curtis. And then finally, section on environmental awareness and education. So section 3 is probably the largest by page count in the OCP, land use management. And talks about general land use management, and then residential land use management, commercial land use management, industrial land use management. And this, especially the residential section, is when it gets into the different policies associated with different land uses that are identified in the OCP. So if you actually look at our current OCP designations, it, for example, has different forms of like rural designation versus rural residential designation. And then the OCP actually has policies that relate to each of those designations. And then, so general land use management has these 4 principles. So the OCP, as well as objectives and policies, has, in this case, has 4 principles about land use management. So principle 1, development take place primarily within or adjacent to areas of existing development activity. Principle 2, adjustments to the location, size, and density of existing lots is encouraged. 3, so talking about notwithstanding adjusting distribution and location of dwelling units, the overall number of primary dwelling units anticipated in the 1996 OCP will remain the same, noting that it may vary by the creation of secondary suites and detached secondary suites. And then principle 4, development applications, which in the opinion of the Director of Planning may have a significant negative impact on the existing lifestyle and environment of the island, will be referred to Council for guidance. And then the general land use management as well just has objectives and policies associated with it. And some of these we'll have seen in the 1996 OCP as well. So when talking about encourage growth located in Snug Cove, give priorities to areas where development already exists, phase gradual development, and to discourage further commercial and residential strip or ribbon development. Residential land use management, so similar to 1996, it's talking about identifying approximate location of residential development to meet anticipated housing needs over the next 5 to 8 years. And I'll just note, this will be one of the probably more significant changes in this OCP update, is that the provincial requirements are now that we anticipate 20 years of housing. So that may be that will be a changed policy and may result in changed land use planning to go with it. Policies about commercial land use management. So maintaining Snug Cove as a primary commercial center for Bowen. Industrial land use management. And I think I've copied the wrong objective in there, but there we go. Land use management, agricultural land use management. So preserving lands that are used for agriculture activity, support and protect right to farm act, to encourage demonstration farming and community garden plot uses for lands on suitable sites. Section on forestry land use management. So managing forests as an environmental resource to support small scale, low impact logging. Public facility and institutional land use management, talking about space in Snug Cove Village so that there can be future institutional land use there. And section on temporary use permits, so to give consideration to temporary land use permits for short-term or seasonal uses. Section 4 of the OCP talks about transportation and mobility, talks about general transportation, water and land and air transportation. So general transportation objective is to provide safe and efficient transportation that meets the needs of residents and visitors. So then water transportation and land about promoting multimodal forms of transportation across the island to encourage safe bicycle and walking and hiking use across the island, to promote Snug Cove as a pedestrian-friendly area that also manages ferry access in a safe and complementary manner. And air transportation as well, which is mostly about discouraging air transportation. Section 5, services and systems, maybe isn't super clear in the title, but when you see the sections, it's about water supply, it's about liquid waste, solid waste, stormwater waste, and energy supply. So water supply is about protecting and maintaining quantity and quality of water for domestic purposes, and then about promoting water conservation, reducing water demand. Liquid waste is about protecting water from liquid waste contamination and ensuring that land development doesn't occur at a density where it is exceeds its natural capacity. Solid waste is about promoting recycling and reuse of solid waste, about trying to reduce the amount of off-island hauling of solid waste. Stormwater waste is about managing flooding, and energy supplies support the use of energy resources available on Bowen Island in lieu of importing similar resources. Section 6 looks at land, parks, and greenways. So public recreation, community parks, and greenways. So it's about securing public recreational land for the needs of island residents and visitors, developing and maintaining public access into selected natural areas to maintain public and private open spaces within the Snug Cove Village. About securing and maintaining community parks, and about working towards an extensive interconnected network of protected natural lands for environmental conservation and protection, recreation, ecotourism, community health, and wellness purposes. Section 7 of the OCP is about housing, so the housing context, and then about diverse and affordable housing. So objective 151 is to remain a diverse community that is welcoming home to residents of varying incomes, lifestyles, and ages. To provide a range of housing types and tenures to generate affordable housing, to provide opportunities for the development of affordable rental and special needs housing. Section 8, community facilities and social well-being. So community facilities, providing places where neighbors can meet and recreate together, to provide for public services and facilities. Objective 157 is again about space in Snug Cove Village to allow for those uses. And objective 159 is about encouraging the development of a multi-use facility where performing arts, social recreation, and community events can happen at a scale in keeping with the island community. And social well-being is about providing for the needs of residents to allow them to continue to live on Bowen as they age, and to enhance recreation for island residents. Section 9, of the OCP about island heritage, arts, and culture. Protecting and encouraging the preservation of heritage values on Bowen, and to identify areas that merit consideration as heritage conservation areas. And 9.2, island arts and culture. Encourage and support the growth of arts and cultural activities on Bowen. Section 10 being island economy. So the overall economy, islands, arts and culture, home-based employment, tourist services, accommodation, and institution and retreats. So overall economy objectives, it's about working towards an island economy that is relatively diverse and increasingly sustainable. It's to move towards an island economy where the ratio between on-island jobs and population gradually increases, and to serve the needs of island residents and visitors while maintaining a scale, form, and character of economic development that is in keeping with the objectives of the OCP. Talks about encouraging Bowen Island to develop local arts and culture, and to support cultural tourism, to encourage home-based businesses, and minimize disruptive impacts of the home-based businesses. And to recognize tourism as an integral part of the island economy with a focus on sustainable practices. And then to recognize health and wellness institutions and retreats as a desirable business sector and to support the growth of this sector. And then section 11 of the OCP is about implementing the OCP. So there's a number of sections here, general OCP implementation, and then it breaks down. So section 11.2 is about specifically the municipal initiatives that are in the OCP. And essentially it's a recap of all the objectives and policies and which ones are specifically tasked on the municipality to implement. And section 11.3 then is which are the objectives and policies that are tasked to other levels of government. 11.4 outlines future development permit areas. And then 11.5 and 6, development approval information and financing of infrastructure. And just the one I'm going to highlight here, it's in the in your agenda, and we can go into it in more detail later. But what I did is I pulled that there are, I believe it's 47 municipal initiatives in the 2011 OCP. And so I went through a couple of weeks ago and I tried to flag, okay, which ones have we completed, which ones have we not completed, and which ones have we done part of the work on. And so essentially my math was that we had 27 were complete, 19 were not, and 9 were incomplete. So about half of them. And I'll say some of them are things like, consider doing something. And so I'd mark it as complete if, there was a report and there was a consideration of doing something, whether or not, in fact, that happened, but it's sort of like that council considered implementing something and decided to or not. And then finally, the OCP has schedules. So it has maps of development permit areas, or Schedule B. Schedule C talks about present and proposed land use designation, which, I mean, it's a planner. I'd say it's probably the highest, most important mapping of it. Yeah, and I see Adam's just asked me about breaking down of those completed initiatives. It is in the agenda, and I can touch on it after. I think, pull them actually into the slideshow, but I can pull it up after. Schedule B then, or Schedule D, sorry, looks at municipal utilities, public roads and ferry terminals, and E being parks and trails. I'm just going into that. So this is the Schedule C, present and proposed land use designations. So this is a little small, trying to show all of them on a slide, but this is probably, me as a planner, the most used map in the OCP that we go to. So this is the map that says, if somebody says, I want to subdivide my property and the zoning doesn't allow it, this is the map we go to say, well, the OCP says you could be 4 lots instead of 2 lots. And so then that would say the OCP would support you submitting a rezoning application to change the designation of your property to allow you to subdivide additional lots. And then the caveat I always tell people is that this is the present and proposed land use designation. So keyword being sort of proposed. And then if you submit to rezone, ultimately it's up to council to determine, like, is the present now, or is the proposed now? Like, the OCP says at some point it should be greater density, and if you apply, then it's up to council to determine if that is appropriate at this time. And this process will be changing based on recent provincial legislation. So this is what the province has changed to say, now when we do a updated Schedule C like this that says these are where future increases could happen, that then there's an expectation and a requirement that the municipality then update the land use bylaw to match this. So when you look at this map, and I could go through areas and say, well, the OCP has said that this could be more lots, but it's actually never been rezoned. They've never come forward. It hasn't happened in the 10 years since this map was adopted, or 13 years since this map was adopted. Whereas when we do a 2024 or 2025 OCP, we will then have to update the land use bylaw and make that change take place. So Schedule D, approximate locations of municipal utilities, public roads, and ferry terminals. It's sort of self-explanatory, but it's interesting to look at what was adopted in 2011. So for example, people in Blue Water, King Edward Bay could note that our OCP map lists a west side water system instead of a Blue Water and a King Edward Bay. And I'm always interested to see too, like, for example, it doesn't list public roads in Cape Roger Curtis. So things change over time. And then parks and trails. All right, parks and trails. So this is one of the areas where, since adoption of this map showing conceptual trails and desired parks, we've done some work with our a parks master plan has come out since then, which has updated some of these things. So we would be looking at, I think, looking at those plans in the parks plan, showing where desired parks are and where desired trails are as sort of a starting point. All right, and then I was going to end just with where we are today, 2023, 2024. So 2023 Bowfest, and just recently Health Center opening on Bowen. So some more changes. And I might stop sharing there for just questions initially. I know I had a question from Adam that I can go into too if people want to look at some of those initiatives and some of that spreadsheet of the section 11. But I thought I've talked for a while now, so I would love to hear questions from people.
All right, I see Jim with his hand up, and then Glenn.
Thanks, Daniel. Great presentation. One thing as I was reviewing it over the weekend that really struck me is over 400 and what 430, whatever the number was, policies. How, and if we were just to project this forward, so is the goal to have 200 more policies? I mean, I'm being facetious, obviously, but it makes me realize that it's a bit daunting to try to think about a municipality this size and trying to be able to administer 400, if they're meaningful, 400 and some odd policies. And so it does, so it's more just a comment and just sort of a reflection as we start this task about sort of, you know, where will this end up? And is it something that is going to be ultimately meaningful for this local government? And I mean, and for the community, I mean, because the other thing too is, I know, and I heard a lot about what Dave was saying about a meaningful process. But if you don't have a meaningful product that we can deliver to the community, then you're really not doing them a service. And so it kind of worries me a bit. And so I'm battling a bit. But I guess I do have a question here. So my question is, do you think that in your experience and maybe what's happening with other municipalities of this size, that there's a different approach to just, 600 policies? Is there a different approach to an OCP?
I think, I mean, even when I was putting this PowerPoint together, like you do see overlap in some of the sections, right? So it's like we have a what was my example? We have a section 9 being arts and culture, and then section 10 island economy has an arts and culture section about the economy. Or we have policies about natural environment and protecting strips, and then we have a greenway section that talks about sort of similar stuff. So there is places where it does look like, okay, maybe there's overlap, like maybe the different sections were adopted or drafted concurrently, and maybe there could have been more work. I do know sometimes it can be a way of like editing down can be contentious as well, right? Because it's like, well, we need to make, so sometimes it's easier to be like, yes, there's a policy about this and a policy about this. I mean, I will say, I think one of my challenges sometimes with the OCP is its size and sort of the way things necessarily aren't necessarily landed on the ground. So the OCP could say, well, we support this type of use and we support these things. And people go, oh, that's great. I want to do that on Bowen. The OCP says it supports it. And then they come to me and they look at the land use map of the OCP and they're like, I want to do this. Where is this allowed? And I go, well, it's allowed in this one spot and that person doesn't want to sell. So, then you're faced with people need to amend the OCP to come. And so either people say, well, it's supported by the OCP because look at all these policies that support it. But if you're not in favor, you say, well, it's not supported there. Like if the OCP really wanted you to do it there, it would have allowed it there and it doesn't. So it's not supported. So that can be a challenge.
Okay, I think that's a real helpful piece, Jim, and certainly some of the things that I felt coming, or some of the piece that I felt coming into office is that it's a dense document, and as a compass or a beacon of direction as to where we go, how do we actually operationalize this as a council and as a staff in in a way that's easily understandable, and then also that's digestible for the community, so that the community really understands the main thrust and the main directions of where an OCP is supposed to go. And then ultimately from that, you know, how do you implement that in terms of the other master plans and land use bylaw, et cetera. Over to you, Glenn.
Gotta unmute myself first. Yeah, thanks very much. And my questions are somewhat an extension or similar to what Jim brought up, and its recognition of the vast amount of information that's in the current OCP. And I guess it raises the question on, for me, in terms of what aspects or the process in which we go through it and kind of determine what needs keeping, what needs editing, what needs deletion, and what needs adding. Who's designing I guess the process? And the other one that comes to my mind is just the engagement of the community. There's obviously Dave Whitty shared a lot of insights and some great examples. There's obviously got to be a program developed for both of those, a review of the existing to make key decisions, and then engagement. Who's designing that process, and who's sort of defining the role of us as a committee in that process?
So we had pegged the next meeting, the June 3rd meeting, as like where we want to talk about work plan, consultant selection. Yeah, that focus is like a great thing to do as an in-person meeting, to where we lay out like these are potential work plans, and yeah, we want to launch a like consultant selection process and all that.
Yeah. Okay. Second question, if I may, is what was so my understanding is the community mayor and council are asking for a fairly comprehensive, or a very comprehensive review process. I'm just curious, is the motive because you all feel that there is something broken in the current OCP, or is it more about just reaffirming with the current residents and businesses that they support the OCP? Is it more of a support thing, a consultation thing, or is it about, you know, feeling that the content is somewhat broken?
Want me to field that one, Daniel?
Yeah, I was leaving that for councillor to answer initially.
Sure.
Oh.
So if I recall the discussions correctly around the council table when we were first putting together the terms of reference for this OCP, as well as some of the discussion around it, there was I think some of the discussion that you framed at that point, Daniel, was around, you know, do we want to just kind of edit it? Do we want to have, you know, a bit more of a section by section review, or do we want to sort of rewrite the whole thing? And council felt like, you know, I think it was Councillor Saunders who made a good point of like, you know, we can say that we just want sort of a cursory review and edit, but you know, in the experience of when that happens, usually you end up doing a bit of a comprehensive review. So part of this is going to be, I think there's no easy answer to that question, but there's a couple of ways to think about it. One is that we wanted to strike a committee of interested, engaged, expert community members who could start to take a look at this question. And that's why you're not seeing a lot of top-down direction of, we have a consultant selected for you. We have a completely defined way of going that we want to undertake this OCP review with. And, you know, basically what you're going to do as a committee is kind of connect the dots to, you know, some riverbanks that we've already determined. So in hearing, you know, what we've had from this last meeting, what we've had today, and then when we get into the next meeting of consultant selection, I think there's going to be some discussion from the committee. And what we'd really like to hear from the committee is, you know, what are your views on the process, and what are your views on the direction moving forward, based on what you've reviewed in the existing OCP, based on what you know of the community, based on what you know of the aspirations of the community. is this going to be a complete rewrite? Is it going to be a bit more of an edit? What are the parts that work and what are the parts that don't work? And that, I think, is going to inform the direction of the committee as well as the selection of the consultant. So when I talked in the last meeting about this being a bit of a dynamic process that exists outside of like a you know, a right-angled kind of bureaucratic way of doing it, there's a lot that still needs to emerge as this process unfolds, and that we're going to be looking for the committee to provide some input. So we're going to fill it in. I think the image I gave last time was of like a 1990s JPEG on the internet filling in, where it's going to come in lines and lines until we actually get a more fulsome view of what the OCP can look like. So what that tangibly means, I mean, just to bring it back to like what this actually means on the ground, is that the next meeting will come together. There's going to be a discussion on the selection of a consultant who can help steer us through this process, who has maybe seen some other OCPs. There's going to be ample feedback that the committee can provide as to that process, and it's going to be, really, okay, what's the next step and what's the next iteration of what we need to do on this work? Does that answer things a little bit, Glenn?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yep.
Right.
So I get the impression you're genuinely open-minded, and that's really where it is. You don't have any particular viewpoint at this point. So that's
okay. So that was
right?
That was the question under the question. Yes.
Yeah. So which is good to know. It's very helpful.
Okay.
So thanks. Yeah.
You're welcome. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Andrew. I had a quick question about the zoning bylaw update. Daniel, you mentioned that example where somebody sees something in the OCP and then the reality in the zoning bylaw is different. Recognizing that an OCP, part of it is that it gives staff some guidance and direction, empower them to make decisions. I'm curious if the intent is to update the zoning bylaw after the completion of this OCP, like this time around, if that's something that council and staff envision happening.
Yes, and I was just trying to find where in the Provincial Act it talks about it. So Bill 44, which the province adopted this last fall, one of the requirements is that we consider a recent housing needs report that shows 20 years of housing, and then it requires that be reflected in an OCP, and then it requires that that a land use bylaw be updated to reflect that OCP number. And I don't have the exact wording, so I think it, at least at the minimum, it requires it in terms of residential land use. So like if this committee, looks at, okay, that's Schedule C, present and proposed land use designations, and there ends up with a map that council adopts in a new OCP and says this is the OCP land use designation map. The province says that has to be complete by December of 2025, and then by December 2025, we have to update the zoning to match it. And that, frankly, for lots of municipalities, that's very scary, because normally the OCP outlines your future, and then you count on sort of individual rezonings to then each individual rezoning to say, okay, let's talk about how it's going to work on the ground on your site. And that's where we're going to say, that's where we want a park designation, and we want a trail, and we want to covenant parts of your land, or whatever it may be. Bigger places, that's where we're going to get amenity contributions and whatever else. And that's essentially been removed. Yeah, so the expectation is that, yes, the OCP updated land use map would flow into an updated zoning bylaw.
I guess my quick follow-up question to that would just be like the timelines for these two processes. Like you said by October 2025, which is probably in the middle of this OCP process. I'm just wondering about that housing needs assessment 1, and then I guess 2, like the process to update that map in advance of the OCP. Because I imagine your preference would have been the other way around.
So this came out in the fall, and the province had said they would have guidelines for housing needs report early 2024. So we're now May, and they haven't put out guidelines. So my initial plan had been the moment guidelines come out, I would commission a housing needs report, and then at our first meeting, I would say, "Here's our updated housing needs report." And we're still waiting on guidelines, and as soon as they come out, I will be commissioning a housing needs report update to give you that information that's needed for that piece of the OCP update. And then about timelines, like, I think it sort of depends how this process is going and me communicating with the province about our expected timelines of saying that I know that the bill says this, but what happens if, our OCP is underway and we want to complete that process and not like jump the gun and do a little update in advance of a full one, but I'm not quite sure.
Just in regards to your question about the housing needs assessment, Adam, you threw that in the Zoom chat. So my understanding, and Daniel can correct me if I'm wrong here, is that we're still waiting for policy guidance from the province on housing needs reports because they haven't released it yet. And some of that work may be helped in conjunction with Metro Vancouver. So the Metro Vancouver board has passed a motion to sort of offer, should municipalities want to opt in, like the ability to do housing needs reports for us in a templated way where they can bring in staff, and because there's going to be issues that are shared across all municipalities. But really, we haven't. Still waiting on policy guidance from the province on some of the housing needs pieces.
Okay, thank you.
And yes, I'll just add to that too. It's like we had been looking at doing like essentially a desktop update. So we had done a housing needs report, I think 2020, and looking at doing an update that would just be updating based on like new provincial guidelines and the 20-year timeline. So in advance of the Metro discussion, I had got a couple quotes thinking that they were going to come out in 2024. And I talked to some consultants about like, could you do this right away for the OCP? And we're now in May, so I'm not sure when they come out with the guidelines if I'll go Metro or ourselves, but probably whichever, given our like unique needs, I'd be looking at like how fast can we do it? Whereas some other communities I know are thinking, well, we don't have to do it until the end of the year, so it's not a priority until the fall.
Okay, over to you, Fritz.
Yeah, this is a bit more general, I guess, but I always felt that a good OCP is not too specific and it is there to enable good things to happen, so to speak. And what I'm a bit afraid of is that, with the land use bylaw, that this effort is almost writing the land use bylaw in the OCP, so that everything that's in the OCP can actually be, you know what I mean? It's kind of it takes away from the intent of an OCP. It's intended to be like a vision for the future, right? And now I can see that, and the land use is probably one of the biggest parts of an OCP review, you know what I mean? Because it's like a lot of people are affected by it. And then you find yourself almost creating a land use bylaw, like the map of the land use bylaw and the OCP, allowing specific uses and densities are going to be more or less the same, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but is that a good process? Like, I guess it's legislated, so there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely a move by the province to move more of that planning to the OCP stage. So sort of like the change to need to update your zoning bylaw to match. And then in addition to, it's like prohibition of public hearings for rezonings that are consistent with the OCP. So yeah, definite messaging from the and legislation from the province to say more of the planning happens at the OCP stage. So that then individual rezonings and development takes place without the need for big rezonings.
But it has to be specific, right? Because like if in the OCP, if it would say it's whatever, high density residential or low density residential, right? Then that's not the same as a land use bylaw who says from so many stories, so much floor space, and goes on and on, right? So that for the rezoning, it's not ready for rezoning. It's only ready for rezoning if you addressed all of those components.
Yeah.
And over to you, Chenna.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. Just maybe a couple of comments and then a question. Thank you to whoever was sort of organizing the priority of speakers, listening to David Woody. I mean, that was really helpful for me as a committee member here, and just applaud that sort of listening to the committee in sort of prioritizing. Thank you for that. A question, sorry, and then another comment. Glenn's comment on the 431 and Jim's comment on the 431 policies. Just curious if, when we are mapping against other OCPs, it would be good to sort of understand what's a reasonable amount, because I would want us to sort of think about the efficiency of municipal hall and folks to be able to actually act on policies going forward. I think that might become a problem in the future, but just more curious. So I just pulled open the West Van OCP and just sort of looked at it. But one thing jumped out to me as a question, as an information guideline, not just knowing where we are today, but knowing where we are going in the future. Metro Van provides population estimates in the future up to 2040 or 2041, according to West Vans. And I'm wondering if that information can be provided to this OCP committee. I just can't find it right away.
Yes, we definitely can. I think it's like people 32 is the population projection. But yes, we'll definitely give you projections going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I think that will help us understand what the external pressures are, at least the predictions are. Thank you.
And then just to jump in, as part of the on the heels of the housing needs reports that Metro Vancouver is going to be helping their member municipalities with, we're also going to be undertaking some newer regional modeling with that as well, that I would expect to be sharing with us hopefully sometime in the near future as well. Okay, any further questions or comments or discussion at all?
I've got one.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Morse.
Daniel, I think our OCP currently is around 150 odd pages. I just looked at Tofino's and theirs is only around 86. So are we on the large side compared to other municipalities from any of your research?
I mean, I was just looking at Squamish's, which is 300.
Oh.
So I mean, I would have said instinctively, like ours is larger than lots of other like sub 5,000 population communities, if you want to put it like that. Yes, but obviously not, not completely out of line with others.
David, you had your hand up and then took it down.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering about similar land size comparisons rather than population, but that's a pretty vague question. So,
I guess some of the, maybe to be helpful just to frame up some of the way that I'm thinking about this and some of the work that I'm doing on this, on the interim, because I am not an expert in OCPs at all. Even, I know that there's some planning folks here on the call that have a better idea of what's going on. I've been looking at this from, I think there's interesting comparisons that people are bringing up in terms of land size, in terms of length of the actual document, in terms of the policies that we're using, in terms of how it interacts with the land use bylaw, and what might be helpful and has been helpful for me so far is getting into both the content and structure of our own OCP, obviously, but I've found getting the sense of the contour of how our OCP has been structured has been helpful. We've got our sort of overarching principles, and then it sinks into objectives, and then each of those objectives, it feels like very much like a hierarchy, like a three-step hierarchy in our OCP. And then a lot of, some of those objectives are supported by policies, some of them are not. And I think one of the things that we've highlighted is that not all of the policies that we've made are actually reflected in on the ground changes to the land use bylaw or have been harmonized. And then the sheer length of the document and the policies can make it unwieldy at times for anyone that's not an expert in that document. There are, I found it helpful to start looking at other communities' OCPs to get a sense of what's going on. There are OCPs that are very rote and very standard, and some of them are pretty short from communities both in the Islands Trust as well as around the province. And then there's also some that are really interesting, and Daniel's flagged some of those already. I find the Nanaimo official community plan that was just done very, very interesting. It won a couple of awards, I believe a planning award and a public participation award for how it was done, and it was based around donut economics and a circular economy. And it's a very visual document that has a number of policies, but the way that the document is structured comes together well, and those policies get reflected in their master plans and their land use bylaws. So my, I guess, maybe soft recommendation would be between now and the next time that we get together is get familiar with the structure of Bowen Island's OCP, and in a sense of like what it's trying to do. So there's like, when you read the document, there's like some very clear things that our OCP is trying to do, I think, in terms of threads of intention. And then just start to sink into some of our neighbors and what they're doing. We've mentioned Squamish, we've mentioned Nanaimo. You can look at some of the OCPs in the Islands Trust, not with a sense of like you've got to be an expert in all of those plans and have digested them and be able to recite off all their policies, but just understanding the underlying structure and the approach of their document, and also importantly, the approach of their process to getting to that document, because that process is going to be important, particularly as we, I think it was Jim that was talking about like the ultimate product of what we're going to end up with, but that product is going to be a result of process, and that process has to bring the community along in a way that they feel represented, that we've carried out something democratic, and that we've done our best to balance the needs and aspirations of the community. And then coming back on June 3rd, I think it is. Maybe Daniel, do you want to flesh out a little bit more about what we might be doing on June 3rd when we come back?
Sure. So we want to talk about work plan and consultants. And so I think what we'll try to bring is maybe even just like a sort of like a bare bones work plan of like, this is what an OCP review process work plan can look like, and not trying to be like, this is what's going to happen, but to give some sort of a draft to work with, knowing that it's much more concrete than just saying like, what would you like to do? Think about it. So to bring that for the steering committee to talk about, and also bring some documents about like hiring consultants, and so we can have a discussion about like what the role of a consultant would be, because there can be a big range of what an OCP consultant does. From like some communities, essentially it's like, go write us a plan and come back, and the consultant will go and do workshops and then come back with a plan, which often look very similar. Like if you look at some community where they end up, the consultants on this community and this community and this community, and you're like, oh, those plans seem pretty similar. So anyways, talking about work plan, talking about consultants, we may be trying to book another speaker like today. So somebody to give us some more background information, trying to pin someone down for that. But the goal of it, talking about, okay, work plan, what's it going to look like going forward? How are we going to hire a consultant? yeah, that focus. And so probably, yeah, blank work plan and maybe some more detailed look at like other community work plans and what they've done.
And then I think at some point, Daniel, maybe, you know, and this is a conversation that you know, you and I can have, or we can have at the staff level as well. But I think given some of the questions I've heard and some of the like, you know, I see hamster wheels turning in brains right now. You know, I'd love to have some kind of like soft process where we can check in with the committee members and start to capture things of like, okay, based on these last 2 meetings or based on these last 3 meetings, what's coming up for you? Like, what would you like to see included in process? It might not necessarily fit now, but just do like a bit more, you know, like kind of outside the Robert's rules frame of just whiteboarding. Okay, like what's come up with you folks so far? What would you like to see included in the process? We might not be able to fit it all in, but just get a wider sense of the committee, what their thoughts are so far.
Yep, absolutely. Like I've been sort of flagging stuff that like, all right, this is what people want, but yes. And definitely if the committee saying we want more background information on whatever it may be, feel free to bring it up in a meeting or to email. Either I think there's now is, but just, you can just email me directly is the most simplest if you want, or email the steering committee email group of saying like, this is what I'm curious about and love to know if there's more information.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we might need to do some work on the on our own IT side of maybe setting up a shared folder or a repository for documents like those.
Yes. Yeah, because I know, you know, right now it's easy. We've had 2 agendas, but soon it'll be like, yes, just refer back to 3 meeting ago agenda. That's where the information is. But no, we'll try to have a centralized location for that information.
And the PowerPoint slides that you've been sharing and things like that too, please. It'd be great to be able to go back and refer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do the PowerPoint slides get added to the agenda, Sophie? Is that how they're dealt with usually?
Yes.
Yeah.
They will be, and then we'll try to do something central. Steph hadn't put the agenda on the or the PowerPoint on the agenda yet because I was rewriting it over the weekend. But
and Dave's would be there too.
Yes, we have Dave's as well, so we can upload it as well.
Yeah. And I know staff has put together on the committee page a list of various items.
Yeah, so we'll work to make sure it's up to date and like relatively clear to find things.
Okay, great. Any final questions or comments at all before we look to adjourn? Seeing none, I thank everybody for their time today, for taking time out of your Tuesday morning to come join us on Zoom and take a deep dive into the historical context of our OCP. And with that, I will look to the committee for a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by David, seconded by Glenn. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye, and that carries. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time, and feel free to reach out if you've got any questions, comments, or things that bubble up between now and then.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.